Welcome to another Thursday night Bible study, brought to you as a ministry of SIGBC.
All year long, we've been talking about the importance of bearing fruit for Christ. And we've broken down the fruit that we are called upon to bear for Christ into various categories, one of which was the fruit of the Spirit. And in the fruit of the Spirit, we found a bunch of things that we were supposed to be doing. And then Paul warns Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, and then 7-8, verse 10 through 15. Mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. There are those who act out of self-love. And he gives a list of all kinds of ways that people act out of self-love rather than love for God and love for others, by talking about the negative aspects of people who act out their self-love by being lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, that is without natural affection, unforgiving, slanderous, and last week we looked at without self-control. And by the way, we're talking about, under the fruit of the Spirit, self-control and self-discipline. And so a person who acts out their self-love will be a person who is without self-control, that is powerless in the face of temptation. And then last week we looked at the fact that they would be brutal, they would be savage, fierce, untamed, because whatever they feel, they act upon. And then we come to the last part of verse 3, not lovers of the good. And that's where we begin our Bible study today. The word good is agathos. The word lover of is phileo. And the word not is So it's actually one word, even though we have in the English not lovers of the good, is actually one Greek word, aphilagathos. And the aphilagathos, not a lover of that which is good, actually expresses the idea of being hostile, in the Greek, being hostile to virtue. And there are people who see good in others and have a visceral reaction to their goodness, perhaps because of seeing their own shortcomings by seeing the strength of others, or perhaps having a different philosophy of life and not wanting to admit to the goodness of the other person's philosophy of life. But whatever the reason may be, there are people who act out their self-love by being not lovers of that which is good. Aphilagathos. It actually, in the Greek, it refers to the concept of being opposed to goodness and to good people. Philagathos describes love of innate moral excellence and intrinsic value. In other words, without the philagathos describes being enamored by, considering it beautiful to pursue moral excellence and acknowledge intrinsic value. So good is good for its own sake. I often said to my kids when they were growing up, do what is right because it is right. Yes, God wants us to do it. Yes, it is the best thing to do. But the only reason we need for doing what is right is because we know that it is right. And if we know something is right, then we do it regardless of how we feel or others might feel about it around us. And so, again, philagathos describes the love of innate moral excellence or intrinsic value. Now, in classical times, agathos was used to define an honorable character or high societal standing. So someone who was well known as a good person. So people who are not known as people of honorable character or people who are not known for their high societal standards, they would be aphilagathos. In the Greek, the word agathos is, in classical Greek philosophy that is, agathos is frequently paired with the word kalos, which means good or beautiful. And so in the phrase kalos kai agathos, it describes the ideal, well-rounded, virtuous citizen who possesses both physical beauty and moral courage in philosophy. Not a biblical concept, in a philosophical concept in the Greek usage. In biblical usage, in the New Testament, agathos refers to things that are intrinsically good. Intrinsically means by nature. That is, in and of themselves, they are good or beneficial. And it's often used to describe God's absolute goodness and the good fruit that is produced by those who pursue virtuous living. And so agathos is, in the Greek biblical concept, in and of itself intrinsically good. Again, intrinsic. So, for example, gold is intrinsically valuable. It is intrinsically valuable because throughout history it has been highly sought after as beneficial both practically and as an investment, both as an object of beauty and an object of genuine worth. Silver. Today, the price of silver has gone way, way up, mainly because of its intrinsic value. That is, it is being used in electronic items. And so, since electronics requires more and more silver these days, then the value of silver intrinsically has increased. Because it in itself is valuable. And so that's what it's talking about. Agathos is intrinsic good. That is, in and of itself, the action is deemed as good. And if you are not a lover of that which is good, then you are pursuing self-love, the Bible says. Then we get all the way down to verse 4 of 2 Timothy chapter 3, where he continues his list. And he actually is now on his 14th item. That is a list of things that people exhibit as an expression of self-love. And the 14th is treacherous. The Greek word for treacherous, prodotes, means surrendering another into the enemy's hands. It is the word that is used for betrayers or traitors. Those who know the worth of someone else and for their own benefit surrender another into the enemy's hands. It reminds you of the biblical character of Judas Iscariot. Treacherous. Prodotes. Because Judas Iscariot had traveled with Jesus, knew Jesus as a friend, had many friends who accompanied him who were followers of Jesus, pretended himself to be a genuine follower of Jesus, and yet he was a traitor. He was a betrayer, and he willingly surrendered Jesus into the enemy's hands. And that is the result of someone who pursues self-love. You remember the story of Judas Iscariot? He had followed Jesus for at least 3.5 years. Everybody thought he was agathos. Everybody thought he was good, intrinsically good. As a matter of fact, you will recall, I bring this up quite frequently because it's so amazing that he was so treacherous and devious that he could fool everybody. When Jesus was saying someone was going to betray him, be a betrayer of him, all the disciples were like, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me, is it? And John was like, you don't, Lord, who it is it that you're talking about? I know it can't be me. And Jesus said, okay, it's the guy that I dipped the bread into the sop and give it to him. And so he dips in the sop, he hands it to Judas Iscariot. And then Judas takes it, eats it, and he leaves. And when he abruptly leaves, all the disciples, the Bible records, thought maybe he was going to go give some money to the poor people. That's how much trust that Judas Iscariot had deceived his fellow disciples into having in him. To the extent where even after Jesus said, I'm going to dip the bread in the sop and give it to the person who's going to betray me, and he dipped it in the sop and gave it to Judas Iscariot, and Judas Iscariot got up and left, and nobody thought he was the one who was going to go betray Jesus. So, a person who is primarily self-seeking and primarily pursues self-love has no qualms with being treacherous. And then number 15, and with this we're going to close today, because we try to keep these Bible studies to within 10 and 15 minutes if we can. Once in a while I go 18 minutes if I'm not careful, but he says that one who is controlled by self-love and doesn't practice self-control or self-discipline, he's rash. Not he has a rash, but he's a rash person. The Greek word propetes actually means a person who is reckless. And it has to do with someone who falls headlong because he isn't paying attention to what is happening. It has the idea of sloping precipitously. Now, I just saw a video a couple of weeks ago of a young girl who was learning skateboarding. She was a pretty good skateboarder to begin with, but she was learning advanced skateboarding. And she was standing at the top of what people who are really into the sport know as the slope, where you go over and you enter, there's actually another word for it, that once you go down the slope, then you come up a curve and then you come back down again. And somebody tell me in the comments what that thing is called. But anyway, she's standing at the top of the slope, getting ready to enter this skateboarding platform. And she stands there and she says, oh, this is so scary. She wants to do it. She's standing at the edge of the slope. She's like, I want to do it. And her dad is actually standing there encouraging her. Go ahead, you can do it. And the video shows her, all right. And she goes over the edge, and as soon as she goes over the edge and she goes headlong down toward the base, she falls off her skateboard. And then she ends up sliding all the way back up again. And she's discouraged and she's a little sobby, but she gets right back up again. So, the word propetes doesn't talk about someone who is courageous. It talks about someone who is reckless, who doesn't take into consideration their own safety and goes headlong into whatever they want to do, who doesn't take into consideration whether it's right or not and go headlong into whatever they want to do. There is a beauty in taking chances, and there is a recklessness in taking chances. And the secret may be to discovering the difference between recklessly taking a chance and being courageous and taking a chance. And that young lady, I would not describe her as propetes, being reckless. I would describe her as being courageous. But the fact is, the word propetes describes someone who is falling headlong down a precipitous slope. So don't be rash. Don't make decisions without thinking them through. Don't be a person who acts before he thinks, in other words. Why? Because the fruit of the Spirit is self-control, and self-control involves self-discipline. All right, thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate you being here, and I'm not sure how long this actually ended up being because I forgot to look at the clock at the beginning, but we'll see you again next week as we continue this very same passage, and we continue studying verse 4 and then verse 5. Verse 5 concludes, having a form of godliness but denying its power.
Thank you for listening. You can also join us in person or live on Facebook every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Japan time. This has been a ministry of Sakahogi International Grace Baptist Church.